My name is Steve Schultz, and we talk about Mars. My first question is always the same. Who wants to go to Mars? I ask it to a lot of people as I walk past the street. And usually your reaction is, huh? It's not something they think about a lot. Going to Mars is something that requires a fair amount of careful consideration. It's a long way away. It takes a long time to get there. A lot of danger involved in going back and forth, assuming you're going to come forth or back. And of course, everything relies on Elon Musk being able to drive that particular scenario where we all go to Mars and live happy ever after. I'm for it. I got to tell you, I'm for it. I think a second planet, which is the whole purpose of this broadcast, these podcasts, are that Mars LOCI. LOCI is a second spot for human civilization. A lot of work to get to a self-sustaining planet, obviously like Mars, or that Mars may become. It's got no, appreciable atmosphere. The gravity is a lot weaker. Initially, what we'll have to do is create some kind of domes or very sturdy places for people to live, homes and offices, or underground, either by digging them ourselves or finding caves. In either case, it's going to be a fair amount of work before anybody can entertain going over there and having any kind of quality of life. So those are all things that have to be done. It's going to take years for that. So the question is whether I want to go to Mars or you want to go to Mars, and I'd love to hear from you. If you want to go to Mars, there's an email at the end of this podcast and all my podcasts. Send me the reason you want to go to Mars. I really want to know. I would like to go for a lot of different reasons. I'm kind of old, so the reality is I'm not sure I'll be a candidate to go to Mars and back. I would want to come back, by the way. So I'm going to throw my hat in the box because I am a candidate ultimately to go to Mars. So having said that, let's take a look at a few things and a few problems we have to overcome on Mars. And these are things that a lot of people have talked about. You can read about a lot of information on that. We're going to do several different things. In this particular program, we're going to look at how we're going to survive on Mars and what power source we're going to use initially. So there's a couple ways we can get power on Mars, or here, as a matter of fact. One of them is, of course, we can use solar power. So we've used solar power a lot on all over the world, but the United States for sure. And what's actually coming to pass, or becoming aware of, is that these large solar installations that we've seen in the desert and other places are very susceptible to nature. So you get hit with hail, windstorms, and it tears them up bad. At this point, we have not set it up in such a way where it is a viable, sustainable way to produce power for any length of time without a lot of maintenance. And there's a lot of maintenance on that. Now, the problem with using solar power on Mars, of course, is that they do have an atmosphere, and the atmosphere may be thinner, but it also drives a lot of small particles through the atmosphere, which is pretty destructive to things like solar panels. Number two, the sunshine's not as bright out there. We're, a few million miles farther away. So those are two major things that make it, tougher. Now, is it going to be a viable, solution? Yeah, there's no doubt we'll have solar power out there. There's no doubt it'll take some, applications that are going to go out there. But the main purpose, or the main, process we'll use to produce power out there is going to be nuclear power. Now, it's possible someday in the future we'll have different nuclear power in the form of fusion power. They've been working on it for about 35, 40 years. They aren't there yet. They keep getting a little closer, but I've been hearing that for 20 years. We're closer. We're a little closer now. And, they're just not quite close enough to do it yet. But we may get there. It's possible. It's not, something I can't disregard. But we're not there yet. And we certainly won't be there in the next 10 years. But I'll tell you what we will have, At this point, nuclear power is a fairly stable and been around a long time. Actually, by 1975 or so, we had like 80 or 90 nuclear power plants across the United States producing a fair amount of power. I think we produce something like 40 or 50% of our clean power from nuclear power plants. Then came TMI, That's 3 Mile Island, for those of you who aren't aware of that. Younger people won't be aware of that. And then there was Chernobyl, which is much later. But TMI was the scary one for us. It was right outside of Harrisburg. It's a little island called 3 Mile Island. And they had a nuclear power plant on that island. And, those power plants were some of the first to go around the United States and the world, really. And they relied on people watching gauges, basically, to make sure nothing went wrong. And what do I mean by something going wrong? Okay, so real basically, a nuclear power plant creates heat. It's got nuclear material, and it's a fission product. And what's fission mean? Fission means you have a big giant nucleus, like a uranium atom 238, 235 is the physical version, and it spontaneously fissions apart, by the way. And at some point, when a 235 breaks in half, or starts to fission, three nucleus particles can fly out. They're neutrons, and they can hit another nucleus, and that can also, drive that chain reaction, so to speak. And then it does another one, and each time one of those nucleus is split, it produces power. It uses some energy up to do the split, creates two smaller atoms, and it creates a fair amount of power for the amount of mass that it loses. And you can get back into EMC squared, which, if you look at it, means it doesn't take a lot of mass to create a lot of energy. So what happened in the United States? Why don't we have power everywhere? Or why don't we have nuclear power everywhere? Well, one of the main reasons is TMI. That was one of the first ones that had to go bad. It was absolutely operator error. They thought they were closing the port. They opened the port. The problem with a lot of the earlier nuclear power stations is that it creates a lot of heat. And the way a nuclear power plant works is they've got a lot of uranium in what they call a nuclear pile or a nuclear fissionable area inside their containment area now. And this gets very hot, once the reaction begins. Very basically, U-238, which is what most of the uranium dug up in the United States is, just some little history on how it makes it work. U-238 by itself, won't create a lot of fission. It's just not stable. That nucleus doesn't want to split, or it doesn't deteriorate for many years. So only less than 1% of the uranium you dig out of the ground is U-235. And that's an isotope. For those who don't know, an isotope means that it's got the same number of protons in the nucleus, but it's got different neutrons, and there's isotopes for everything. So U-238 is the normal one. U-235 is not a lot of it around. So what they had to do for the first power plants, and still, is they use centrifuges and use different processes to chemically and physically separate U-235 out of the U-238 and accumulate that so that the percentages of that material, U-235 in this case, was large enough to sustain a nuclear reaction. At less than 1%, it won't. And the reason it won't, once again, getting a little more technical, is that the neutrons that are released from the U-235 atomic mass, it splits, are typically too slow. They're called slow-moving neutrons. Too slow to split a U-238 atom. It's tightly bound. It doesn't want to split. So it has to find a U-235 atom, which does split when it hits a slow neutron. And then that, of course, spits out more neutrons, which hits another 235. And if they're close enough together, that'll keep on going. In fact, it can do runaway. And that's the issue with 3 Mile Island. If you have too much of this nuclear meltdown going on, or spontaneous fission, you create more heat than the system can take. So what they did is they created the ways to control this heat. They did it by moderator rods of carbon. They put it in water, which is a nuclear moderator. And of course, the water in many of the nuclear power plants is how it generated its heat, steam. It creates steam from the heat in the nuclear pile, and then went out and turned some kind of a generator to form either more electricity or go on to form heat for another plant or whatever. I mean, it's used for a lot of different things, but mostly electric generation. So we've got about 97 plants across the United States. At least we had in 96. So from 1970 to about 1975 or so to 1995, I think we had maybe 2 nuclear or 3 nuclear plants that were started, and not all were built. Tennessee Valley Authority came up with an active nuclear power plant. 2016, I'm sorry. So it was a long dry spell. A lot of people say, why didn't we do that? The main reason, the main culprit, was a movie called The China Syndrome. Now, it just so happens this movie was made before the TMI melted down, 3 Mile Island. It had Jane Fonda in it. Not my favorite person. Jane Fonda scared the United States with a fictitious movie, by the way. You're not gonna. The whole purpose of that, the whole point of that movie was that in the chain reaction, the nuclear powers can melt down and melt through the earth and go to China. It's called the China Syndrome for that reason. Obviously, it didn't quite make it to China. Now, Chernobyl was a bad one. 3 Mile Island was a bad one. We've had some stuff in Japan happen that wasn't good. So there's been some accidents. There's been some problems with that. And a lot of those problems were, once again, human-made issues. You know, humans made the mistake. They were the last line of defense of keeping these nuclear power plants safe, and they didn't work out for a lot of different reasons because humans make mistakes, just like anything else. So, what's the solution? Well, we've been working on it for a while. The solution is called SMR, small, let's see what they call them. They got 2 different names for these things. Small modular reactor, and sometimes it means small and medium reactor, but small modular reactor is typically what they mean by an SMR. And they have anywhere from 5, kilowatts, or megawatts, 5 megawatts to hundreds of megawatts. So a regular power plant that we have around, are thousands of megawatts, because they're large plants and take up a lot of room. These smaller units are, in many cases, self-sustaining. In other words, they don't need any new fuel for many years, sometimes 10, 15. Some of these systems can last up to 60 years. Some of them do need, extra nuclear material here and there. The good thing about them is that, they no longer are capable of melting down and having an issue because they're self-quenching. They got a lot of different ways to do that. They got a lot of different systems now. They got these faster reactors, fast neutron reactors. You got some small reactors used for a lot of different things. Some of the issues on these small reactors is that because they are smaller, because they use less nuclear uranium, is that they have to have a certain amount of volume of uranium to sustain a nuclear reaction. And this is because when they actually create the uranium by enhancing the 235 in normal uranium, and a normal power plant across the United States and most of the world, it's like anywhere from 3 to 10% or 8%, 3 to 7%, something like that. So there's not a lot of 235 versus 238, and they have to have a bigger operation to get a lot of power out of it. In the smaller plants, they need more power out of a smaller section of uranium. So they enhance that to anywhere from 10 to 20% of U-235 to U-238. In fact, when you take a look at the nuclear reactors they're using in some of the power plants that are powering our nuclear subs, they're way up there, 78%, 90%, enhanced. So they're very, very reactive, very potent. But they're also much smaller plants, and that's the whole idea. They're built to a smaller standard. But we've also made a lot of advances in different things. And it's unfortunate that we really had such a setback, in the 70s and 80s. And most of this was done from the film and Jane Fonda was absolutely one of the ones pushing this film and scaring people with nuclear reactions. In fact, the surprising thing here is that Jane Fonda, who was the main actor in this movie, The China Syndrome, if you look back on some of her earlier movies, she was also Barbarella. Barbarella was a mostly naked, spacefaring nymph that ran around in different worlds and did different things. It was hard to take them seriously. And unfortunately, she's also Hanoi Jane. I know a lot of people watching this weren't around during the Vietnam War. But during the Vietnam War, a lot of people were against the Vietnam War. I got it. Wars are bad. I'm not saying it was a good thing. I don't think it was a good thing. But it wasn't a good thing for Jane Fonda to go to North Vietnam, or say derogatory things against our boys and our military. And she did. And she sat in an aircraft gun and got a picture taken and exclaimed that she understands why the Vietnamese were torturing, our flyers and our people that are POWs, because she understood they were liars and didn't believe in the right thing. So that was all very bad stuff. I can't forgive her. She has asked me to be forgiven over the years. Not my thing. I'm not saying it was a good war. There's no such thing as a good war, but it certainly is bad for somebody to go on the enemy and give praise to what they're doing that are very bad, very bad. And today, one of the reasons North and South Vietnam are communistic is because of people like Jane that told us to pull out. And when we did pull out, and we did pull out of that war, very bad things happened. The North Vietnamese swept in and killed many, many people. Many people. It was very tragic stuff. And today they're all communist. It's a communist country. So that really wasn't a good thing. But back to the main subject of nuclear power plant, nuclear power systems on Mars. We need a reliable power system that lasts for a long time. And these small nuclear power systems now coming up around as SMRs come in a lot of different varieties of shapes and sizes. I don't know the size they'll need initially over there, but megawatts, probably 10 to 20 megawatts. These units are big, they're shielded. So, for instance, Elon may have to incorporate one of these large nuclear power plants into, the actual capsule that does the flying of SpaceX. Theoretically, you could take that, fly it out to Mars, have it land on Mars, and then instead of having to take anything apart, just use that as the platform for power. The power can be used a lot of different stuff. I mean, they're going to have, cranes. They're going to have to run stations that purify water. They're going to have to heat, and cool different buildings down and different areas down. They're going to have to create power to do a lot of construction items. And they're not going to run their construction vehicles at this point with any kind of gasoline or petroleum for sure. Unlikely. So what they're going to do is power them with batteries. It'll be a battery-powered, society initially. And those batteries will be recharged by the nuclear power or charged directly by nuclear power. So that's the initial guidance you're going to get when you start to get into nuclear power. You start to get in the beginnings of, the Mars transition. So, once again, please shoot me an email if you think you would like to go to Mars, or if you think you would like to go to Mars and why that would be. Looking ahead, 10, 15 years we'll say, when we've actually got a foothold on Mars, I would say that the likelihood of a lot of people from the United States going probably aren't as great, because most people in the United States are doing okay. They may not be wealthy, but they're comfortable. They got kids. They're raising families. Even the youngsters that don't have kids yet want to have kids and raise families. And they've got a pretty good life and a better life to look forward to, hopefully. Whereas a lot of your third world countries, and there are many of them, don't have so many good things to look forward to. So just like the original settlers that came into the United States, or what would become the United States, came from oppressed environments, and environments they were looking for better, to do better. The people that will go to Mars initially, not the very first ones, they'll be the scientists and the engineers, of course, but the first wave of settlers will be coming in, will not be, your people from a background that's comfortable. I mean, they're going to be coming in hoping for better. Now, that's the whole point. They're going to come in there looking for a way to make their mark on society, on that society. And there's a lot of things they're looking to do. I mean, initially, maybe they can, develop ore and sell it back to Earth. I mean, whatever it happens to be. Maybe they can do some limited farming if it's underground. There's different ways to do that. We're going to do a program on that. So those are things that definitely be something to look at. And that's one of the reasons why I like to hear from people, to see what they look for, the reasoning behind traveling to a foreign planet or another planet and starting over, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to start over. So anyway, please contact me. Let me know if you've got some desire to go to Mars, and then what we'll do is we'll follow this up with another episode of another challenge on Mars. Electricity is one of the challenges, obviously. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.